Yes, we learned how to write a 5-page math lesson for a second grade classroom, but we just got jobs as fifth grade language arts teachers. So now what do? I haven't seen a first day of school since I was in school. I can't even picture how my classroom is going to run. I haven't even seen my classroom. Like, I don't even know where to start. It's okay, friend. I've got you. I'm your teacher big sister. I have lived through 13 first days of school, and here is exactly what you're going to do to set yourself up for not only a great first day of school, but a great year. We will create a super clear vision of the first 2 weeks of school. We will talk about what your first day and week will actually look like. We are going to organize and categorize and prioritize all the things that are swimming around in your mind, and I will send you on your way feeling like a confident little teacher baddie. So let's get going. Okay, so let's start by clarifying all the mess that's swirling around in our mind. Classrooms, bulletin boards, lesson plans, binders, school supplies, behavior management plans, classroom management plans, routines and procedures. When all else fails, come back to this place. Your goal for the first 2 weeks of school are to create safety, predictability, and community in your classroom. So whenever you start to get overwhelmed, default back to, I need my students to feel safe, I need my environment to be predictable, and I want to create community. So how do I do that? Well, first, let me give a disclaimer. One, this is going to vary based on age. My focus is upper elementary. This can also be tweaked and modified to fit lower elementary or middle school. And then some resources that are going to help you really clarify this video is one, there's a video, it's my second one in this series, about how to effectively teach your routines and procedures. Obviously, routines and procedures are going to be at the heart of this video and setting your school year up for success. So please go watch the video on setting up your routines and procedures and how to effectively enforce them for the whole year, okay? You can have the most beautiful routines and procedures, but if they are not effectively implemented and then enforced throughout the year, maintained, then it's all gonna fall apart. So please, you'll be doing yourself a disservice if you do not learn how to do that. So go watch that video. I will link it in the description of this video, okay? Okay, so let's zoom in. First day of school. Your priority here is literally to survive. Any teachers that have already been through first days of school, any teachers that are veteran teachers out there, new teachers, please understand, if you make it through the day alive, if your children make it through the day alive, you have won. That's the only goal here, is to make it through the day safely. Don't lose a kid. That's what it comes down to. The first day is just so chaotic. It's literally just making it through the day. So be easy on yourself, okay? Bonus points if you're able to maintain some semblance of control or calmness in your classroom. Bonus points if you're able to do some community building. And bonus points if you're able to effectively teach some major routine for your classroom, whether it's your attention getter, your morning routine, how to raise their hands, whatever, okay? Your goal for the first week of school is going to be know your kids' names and faces, first names. Know your kids' first names and faces. Your kids know some general bones of your classroom. They can describe kind of how your classroom flows or works. Your things your general classroom rules, how to come into the classroom, how to get your attention, how you get their attention, how to pack up, how to walk in the hallway, and how to do recess and lunch. Those are the main heavy hitting bones of your classroom. Again, that's a goal. So we want to be able to hit all of those things. And then another goal is for all of your students to feel somewhat comfortable in the classroom, working with each other, whether it's in a partner scenario or a group scenario. Your students should have started to form some types of relationships and dynamics in your classroom. And they know each other's first names. All right, zooming out to your goals for the first 2 weeks. You and your students have an idea of how your classroom runs and how your classroom feels. So that means procedures around your classroom, your level of expectations, your day-to-day operations and schedule, more or less, and the core of your lesson. So based on your curriculum, that's probably your direct instruction and then your student work time. You and your students should have kind of an idea of how that looks in your classroom. Another goal in the first 2 weeks, at this point, we should know our students pretty well. We should know their first names and their spelling. We should have an idea of some general dynamics in the classroom. We could maybe make a seating chart based on some dynamics that we've observed. And you have a loose idea of who needs support. Okay, so staying zoomed out, we kind of want to clarify our vision around how we want our classrooms to run and feel. So this is going to serve as kind of an anchor, a baseline for you to come back to every time you start to get overwhelmed, every time you start to get all the details start spinning around. So it helps for me to do some reflection on my personality. I personally, in my personal life, who I am as a human, I need a lot of calmness. I need a lot of quiet for me to think. I need low stimulation environments, which means low stimulation sounds, low stimulation with my eyes. I just need a very calm environment. So you better believe that that's going to translate over to my classroom really well. And sure enough, those things also really help students. So if you're here on this channel, that probably resonates with you. So some ways that I achieve that in my classroom: I hate the big lights. I always dim my big lights, and I have lots of ambient lighting around my classroom, lots of lamps, lots of twinkle lights, things like that. I'm almost always playing lo-fi study beats. There's tons of great channels on YouTube, and I just embed them into my slides or have them playing like during student work time. When we're not like actively learning, I'm doing direct instruction, my students are working together, we're silent in my classroom. My transitions are silent, independent work time is silent. Those are expectations that I've put in place to achieve the vibe that I want and for my students to be successful. And that has come with years of experience, learning through years of experience that is what works best for me and my students. Another way that I achieve calmness in my classroom is that I really hit my routines for transitioning in the classroom really hard at the beginning of the year. I have very clear expectations for how we move from one activity to another in my classroom. I maintain predictability the best I can, which means that I'm sticking to my schedule for the most part every day once the school year is going. My actual instructional class time follows the same format more or less every single time. My expectations for my students, the way that I want them to get my attention, the way that I expect them to work with each other, stays the same every single time. That builds in predictability for me and for my students. And then just our vibes in general. In general, I like to maintain a semblance of calmness and control as the adult in my classroom, and I really think that trickles down and translates really well to my students. And what that looks like is that I have a strong grasp on how to get my students silent and paying attention to me. I have a great plan for what to do when my students don't follow my expectations, and I know how to redirect my students. Those are things that help our classroom feel under control. And again, I'm going to link that video if you are what the heck, how do I do that? I'll link that video for you guys in the description, okay? I want my classroom to feel productive, which means that we are snappy, we are moving along, there is no time wasted, we've got our routines down, and my students are eventually running my classroom for me come October. And I want my students to feel confident in the classroom. My students know exactly what to do. They know exactly how to do it. They have been given the tools to do it to the best of their ability. My students know me and my expectations, their needs are met, and it's safe to interact with their classmates in my classroom. All these things for how my classroom feels: calm, productive, under control, safe, predictable. All of those things are going to lead to a happy, productive environment. So why am I saying this? Remember that those are the things that whenever things start to get really foggy and messy in your mind, come back to how can we create a calm, productive, safe, predictable environment. Okay, so to keep zooming in, we said that in the first 2 weeks, we want our students and ourselves to understand how our classroom is going to feel and how it's going to run. So let's zoom in on how our classroom is going to run. We want to try to nail this down in the first 2 weeks, give or take. If it takes you a month, that's totally fine. But just know that this is the goal, is that you want you and your students to have a good grasp on how your classroom runs. So let's talk about how your classroom is going to run. Okay, so some structural pieces to focus on. You want to focus on how do your students come into your classroom and how do they start their work time. We want to keep that the same every single day. My last video was about morning routines or entry routines into your classroom and how that's crucial for setting your students up for success. I keep that the same from the first day of school all the way until the last day of school. Like I said, you want to think about how do students start their work time. So whether you start off your class with a warm-up, or you start off your class with direct instruction, or you start off your class with stations, or you start off your class with intervention, you want to keep the same routine every single day. Maybe the first thing they do whenever they come into class is start their warm-up or some independent task. Maybe the first thing they do whenever they come into class is get their book bins and start reading. Maybe the first thing they do when they come into class is jump to a station that they've already been assigned to. Maybe it's go to their seats and sit silently while you pull up the slide. Maybe it's to have their desk completely cleared off and they come to the floor whenever you call them. Either way, this needs to be an established part of your class time. You need to teach the steps that you want, and then you need to practice and enforce the steps that you want your students to follow. Again, I cannot recommend enough. Go watch video 2 and 3 in this series that I'm going to link in the description. If you're whoa, that's so much to figure out. What are all these routines and procedures? Routines and procedures are going to be the bones of your classroom. You have to have solid routines and procedures for your classroom to flow. Understanding the importance of routines and procedures is a prerequisite for this video. Please go watch. Try to nail down how your students get to work after you've given instruction. So maybe you have the format of having your students come sit on the floor for a mini lesson and then you send them off to go do their work. Maybe you have the format of you lecture whole group while students are working and then you give them a task and then they go work. You need to have some type of format for moving from instruction over to their students' work, okay? And then have a solid system around where your students' materials are stored and how to access them and when they need them. Do they come into your classroom and go get their things out of their cubby and then go to their seats? Do they have all of their materials stored in a drawer, one of those Rubbermaid drawers at their table group, and one person's job is to collect all of the science notebooks for their table group? Do they keep all of their things inside of their desk and only pull out what they need for that certain subject? Do they carry their backpacks around with them? Whatever it is, nail down your system for your students' materials, how they're going to use them, when they're going to use them, how to access them, how to put them away. Try to nail down what your instruction and student work time is going to look like. So this is obviously really going to vary on like your district, your curriculum, the subject and age that you teach. It could vary day to day depending on your subject. But like over my last 13 years as a teacher, more or less my structure in my classroom, no matter what I taught, whether it was 4th grade language arts or 5th grade social studies, 5th grade math and science, it was almost always I give brief chunks of instruction and then my students go work either individually or in groups. When my students were doing their work, whether they were working individually or in groups, it was almost always labeled in a must-do, can-do format. So they always had their main task and then some options for when they were done. Now, if you're a first-year teacher, you probably don't know what that's going to look like, and that is totally normal and okay. Because remember, this is what our goal is for the first 2 weeks. We want to have an idea of what this is going to look like. So you're probably not going to know on the first day of school. You're probably not going to know on the first week of school. You're probably not going to know until you have like a flow of like teaching a little bit of content. So just remember that right now we're talking about our goal for the first 2 weeks is to have an idea of how these things are going to look, okay? So you can add this to your to-do list of like talking to your team, talking to grade level leads, talking to content leads, talking to instructional coaches of like how do those lessons as far as like the direct instruction and the student work time, what do those look like every day? And then teachers, do not sleep on this. Whether you're a veteran, whether you're a first year teacher, whether you're a student teacher, whether you're a para, whatever it is, you must teach your students how you are going to get their attention. I do this on the first day of school. This is my very first routine I teach, is how I get my students' attention. And why this is so important is because your students can get as out of control as you want them to. They can get loud, they can play games, whatever it is. I can do anything with my students because I have a very strong grasp of how to get my students under control. We could be on a field trip. We can be having like a party in the classroom. We could be playing a game in the gym, whatever it is. You need to know how to get your students under control. And what I use almost every single time is a countdown. I think that is the elite attention getter. My students know that as I'm counting down, they're expected to have their voices off, eyes on me, bodies still, and listening to the words that are coming out of my mouth by the time I get to 0. So I could start at 10, I could start at 3, whatever it is. I have taught and we have practiced so many times how to get silent by the time I count down to 0. You'll get an A+ bonus points if you're able to nail that down like in the first week though. And then also in the first 2 weeks, please nail down, you will thank yourself 1,000 times for this, please nail down how you want your students to get your attention. Okay, so first year teachers, look me in the eyes. You are not going to let your students get up and walk up to you to ask you a question. Do you understand? You will thank yourself later. Do not make that mistake. Crucial, number 1 mistake. Do not let your students come up to your desk. Do not let your students walk up to you to ask you a question. You must stand 10 toes down on that expectation. Do you understand? And I'm telling you this because I care about you. And you will hate your life if you let your students do that all year, okay? Another tip for getting your students to get your attention, don't let your students raise their hands while you're talking. Look, while we're at it, while I'm clearly already giving some tough love, here are some more tough loves for you. If your students are raising their hands constantly and saying, what are we doing? Something is very wrong, okay? Something is very wrong with like them paying attention while you're giving instructions, the instructions that were given. That student was jacking around doing something, like something is amiss. If you have like tons of students raising their hands consistently almost every day saying, what are we supposed to be doing? That's a red flag. Go ahead and eliminate the what do I do? I'm done. Go ahead and eliminate that by using the must do, can do format, okay? I have not heard those words in years. What do I do now? I'm done. Because my students know, like I taught them and we practice, and every day I use that must do, can do format. Here's your task. Here's what I expect. Here are some choices when you're done. Don't ask me. Like our goal here with raising hands should be that you give instructions, you give your directions. You have such good control of your classroom that there's no questions about what they should be doing. They shouldn't be needing you. They have what they need. They know what the directions are. They know what to do when they're done. Everyone has what they need to be successful. Like no one should be raising their hands. If we have hands everywhere, that's like a red flag for like content or classroom management. And we're nailing down that classroom management with our routines and procedures. We're getting our students quiet when we give directions. We're not moving on until all their eyes are on us. We've given that must do, can do format. Like our students are very clear on what they should be doing. We're gonna do like a deep dive on instruction and like giving really good instruction later on in this series. So stay tuned for that. But like, we're not the teachers. We're not running the classrooms where our kids are constantly raising their hands needing us. Our classrooms are running themselves, right? Okay, and then again, staying with like our goals for the first 2 weeks, here are some routines and procedures that you wanna like nail down. If you don't have one of these checklists of like routines and procedures, you need to get one of these, have one of these like saved to your Google folder or whatever. Have one of these checklists of routines and procedures. I'll link mine for you guys as a freebie in the description. And I highlight these. I put them in like my first week of school, like to-do list. These are the major routines that you want to hit in your first 2 weeks of school, okay? You want to hit that attention getter. You want to hit how your students get your attention. You want to nail down that morning or arrival routine. You want to nail down that pack-up routine. You want to nail down your hallway expectations, lunch and recess. You want to nail down switching classes if you're departmentalized, or switching between activities or subjects if you are self-contained. And you want to nail down things like all of your supplies and materials. So like pencils, sharpening pencils, what to do when you don't have a pencil, getting their math workbooks, using a science notebook, getting their reading folder. Like you want to nail down like your expectations around supplies. So those are your heavy hitting routines. We want to nail those down in the first 2 weeks. Okay, now let's zoom in on our first day of school. Like, what is our actual first day of school going to really look like? I'm not exaggerating when I say that your goal for the first day of school is literally to survive. It's not going to look like what your normal day of school is going to look like. It's not going to feel what your normal day of school is going to feel like. Like, this day is chaotic and you just want to survive without losing a kid, okay? So in the spirit of not losing children, dismissal. Know how your children get home. So like maybe your campus takes care of this for you and you have like a list of how all your kids are getting home that day. Maybe when it was Meet the Teacher, you had like a printout list where parents wrote down like how their child was getting home. That's something that you can make if you're a first year teacher, if you don't already have that. If parents are dropping students off at the door on the first day of school, you could ask them right then and there, hey, how's so-and-so getting home today? And write that down. You want to make sure that you pack up super early at the end of the day and have your students like grouped based on how they're getting home. Maybe over the summer you made like backpack tags or like wristbands that said like car rider. And then on the first day of school, you wrote those students' names on there and gave them to them. Something. You want to 100% know how every single one of your students gets home from school on the first day of school, second day of school, first week of school, okay? And then to be honest, the first few days of school, the first day of school for sure, I don't ever write out like minute by minute lesson plans unless I have like somewhere that I actually need to be. The way that I do it on the first day of school is I write out a list of my must-dos and my can-dos. So I write out a list of like routines that I for sure want to get to. I write out a list of like community building activities that I like for sure want to get to. So my routines that I for sure want to get to on the first day of school, I always do lunch duty. I'm crazy about lunch. I want my students to know some basic bones of our lunch routine, our cafeteria expectations. I teach my students how we're going to walk in the hallway because at my campus, that is very strict how you walk in the hallway. And then I also call it a win if I have taught my students how I get their attention with my countdown. Those are my musts for the first day of school. Community building activities, these usually change for me like year to year based on what I've seen on social media over the years. So like all those fun little community building things that you see on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, make a list of like have a plan for like 2 or 3 of those that you want to do on the first day of school. And then pro tip, have a little list of like time filler activities, because on the first day of school, things just get kind of chunky. You have little like chunks of time. Students start to get like kind of restless or they need like a break. So again, those could be like the cute little games you see on social media. You could do read alouds. You could sort through those school supplies in a very systematic manner. Have a little list of like bite-sized things that you can do as like time fillers. So literally those are your plans on the first day of school. I jot down times that I need to be in certain places, you know, whether it's specials, whether we're supposed to meet in the cafeteria at a certain time. I have a list of routines that I must teach. I might have those things chunked by like what time of day. Like for example, I know that I want to do like a community building activity first thing in the morning. So I'll have that moved up on my list, but I just have like loose chunks of time for those routines and community building things that I cross off as I teach them. I feel like this is something else that no one really talks about is like, what do you do when your students first enter your classroom for the very first time? One, you're going to want to have a roster printed out on a clipboard. You are going to carry that bad boy around with you all day. On my clipboard, I have that roster, I have my checklist of routines and procedures, and I have that loose schedule that I've made of my must-do and can-do activities. And me and that clipboard are like attached at the hip all day. So with that clipboard, with that roster, when kids come into my classroom first thing in the morning, I check their name off, tell them I'm so happy that they're there. We introduce ourselves very, very briefly at the door. If parents have dropped them off, I ask parents, or I ask that student, since it's fifth graders and they're old enough they know, I ask them how they're getting home from school. I'll write that next to their name. And then I also ask about lunch. If you have parents come to your door on the first day of school, first year teachers, please understand that this is not a time for conferencing. Like, we're not asking about students' needs. We're not asking about anything I need to know. Like, hopefully your campus has done a good job of like setting boundaries and they have like a orientation night or a meet the teacher or conferences or early in the year, something like that. The first day of school, your job is to like make your students feel comfortable. We're not conferencing with parents. Make those parents feel comfortable. Be gracious. You know, you're happy that they're there and they're in good hands with you for the day, but that's not a time to like be chit-chatting and giving the parents your attention, if that makes sense. So with wanting my students to feel like as calm and safe and like emotionally regulated as possible, as comfortable as possible, I meet them at the door and I tell them to go put their backpacks on a backpack hook, that they don't need to get anything out. We'll take care of that later. Go pick a backpack hook, hang up your backpack, go choose a seat. I let them choose their seats on the first day of school. Everyone's desk has a back to school packet, a pencil, and a cup of colored pencils at the table group ready and waiting for them there. I let them pick their seats on the first day of school. I let them pick their seats, I think usually like the first week of school. That way I can kind of like feel out the dynamics of my students. And then I can make a really good seating chart based on the observations that I've made while they got to choose their seats. And then my expectation is that once students get seated, they work silently and independently on that back to school packet. I have my morning message up that has like our schedule for the day and like a welcome message. And I have that lo-fi music playing. No matter what you choose for your students like to work on as soon as they sit down, I love that back to school packet because it's things like word searches, coloring pages, student surveys like get to know you, tell me about your summer, things that are very like low stakes, low like mental energy, because our goal is for students to like feel calm and regulated and comfortable. You know what I mean? Students can choose to work on any page. It meets all of your students where they are. And then we can use a lot of those pages for like a get to know me activity later in the week. If you're wondering, yes, I have my own that I've made. I will link it in the description for you guys. Along with my morning message up on the board, I also have a timer that just builds in more of that like predictability and safety for my students. Like they know exactly what to expect. They know they have this much time to work. When that timer goes off, they know we gather for morning meeting. I have a video coming later in the series on morning meeting because that is one of my most commonly asked about questions. So I'm gonna save that for like my community video in this series. But my main point is that once that timer goes off, we do some type of community building activity. Okay, and then while we're seated on the floor for that morning meeting or that community building activity, I'm usually from this place, I'm going to give my students directions for some type of like independent task that they're going to go do at their seats. And the reason I do that is because you want to like this is like rigorous. Like the first day of school is like exhausting for you and for the students. So it's good to like take things in like chunks and like bite-sized increments throughout your day. So, you know, we did like a very social activity where we had to like, you know, follow directions. We came to the floor together. The students were a little bit on edge. So now I'm going to give them some directions for something calm, something low stakes, something engaging for them to go do at their desks. I'm going to have some like very concise, brief directions on the board along with a timer. Usually from there, we hit one of our routines. You don't want to like stack on like teaching routine after routine after routine because that's like, that sucks. Like the kids don't like it. It feels very punitive sometimes. So like I try to break those up. So maybe we go hit hallway, maybe we hit the cafeteria, maybe we hit an attention getter, something like that. When we're done with that, I'm going to let them ease back into that independent activity, the same one that we were doing from earlier in the day. This might be a good time for like a community building game, like something fun and light. Make sure you've taught your attention getter. Make sure you've at least told them what you want for that day for your attention getter so that if you're doing some kind of game, you have a way to get them back under control. I might follow that up with like a read aloud. Following that pattern, I might hit another routine and then send them back to their seats for that independent task. That could be a back to school packet. That could be some like get to know you page that you have. That could be something for like a bulletin board. Like I said, some very like low stakes independent task. And then I'm going to follow that pattern like pretty much the whole day, blending in light academic activities, community building activities with routines. That's my pattern throughout the day. And then whatever I don't get to, I'll get to that on day 2. So you can go ahead and like write out a strict lesson plan for day 1, day 2, day 3. It's going to change. Day 2, every time that I've written lesson plans for day 2, it always changes based on what I did or did not get done, based on what I did or did not observe on day 1. That's going to inform like what my day 2 is going to look like. But for me, day 2 basically looks the same. We're still focusing on routines. We're still focusing on community building. We're still doing some independent work, and I'm following that same pattern, that same format. And then moving on, like past our first 1 or 2 days, let's talk about like what your first week is going to look like. I'm from the school of no content the first week. We can do like some content-based like organization, setup. We can learn like how our lessons might function, but I'm not teaching long division strategies. I'm not teaching scientific method. I'm not teaching like actual skills and knowledge on that first week of school. Not if I want to have good classroom management the whole year. So hopefully your admin is on board with that. Because like I said at the beginning of the video, our priorities for the first week of school is teaching routines, getting organized, getting comfortable with one another, getting to know one another, getting a feel for how that classroom is going to flow. And we can't do that if we're busy trying to keep up with our pacing calendars. Like, yeah, you can be caught up on your pacing calendar and you're going to pay for it later because your classroom is going to be out of control. So again, in the first week of school, I'm still going to use that checklist that I had. It is still on my clipboard along with that roster. We are still attached at the hip. I'm checking off some of these routines as I've taught them. I taught my attention getter. I taught my morning routine, how to come into the classroom. I taught how to walk in the hallway. I taught my recess expectations. So throughout the first week of school, I'm still rolling out some more of these routines and procedures. And the way that I'm doing that is by like embedding them in the stuff that I'm doing in my classroom. So what I mean by that is that you can take one of these routines and combine it with some activity that you have planned and teach those together. So like my attention getter, if I'm going to do a classroom scavenger hunt with my students, before I do that, I'm going to show them my attention getter, and I'm going to use that multiple times during that scavenger hunt so that my students can practice that routine of paying attention to me when I start counting down. Another example, I gave my students some independent tasks to work on, a get to know me page or something like that, and I'm going to teach them how to use the must do, can do format. So up on my screen, I'll have must do, complete your, all about me details flower. Your can do options, you can work on your back to school packet, or you can read one of the books that I put in the book bin at your table group. So I'm teaching my students how to use that must do, can do format while they're also working on that independent task that I gave them. Maybe you did the bingo from the back to school packet and you want your students to share out if they found somebody who, answers one of those questions. You can teach them how you want them to raise their hands, your expectations, your routine for how to raise their hands using that bingo. So you could give your expectations for raising hands. Like, we don't raise your hands while I'm talking. We raise our hands by putting our arm all the way up. I always say that their bicep is by their ear. This is not going to get my attention. They raise their hands when they have something that they already want to say in their heads, like they know what they're going to say. They don't raise their hand and then think of what they're going to say. So do you see how I'm able to teach my routine, my procedure, my expectations for raising their hands while we're doing another back to school activity? Does that make sense? If I'm doing a read aloud on the third day of school, I can teach my expectations for how we come to the carpet for a read aloud. I'm going to have you guys come to the floor for a read aloud. We're going to have 4 rows of 5 students. So what that's going to look like, and I start teaching that routine. Like if you're like, oh my gosh, how does she teach how to come to the floor? All that stuff is in video 2 or 3, or it's in my example breakdown document that I have on my website. It has exactly what I do for all of these routines and procedures. Like if you're needing somewhere to start, you need some baseline, some idea of how to get started on these routines and procedures for your classroom. That independent task that I gave my students, I can also teach them how I want them to always turn their work in for the rest of the year. You can build in some turn and talk expectations. You can build in some cutting and gluing expectations. You can build in some passing out paper expectations. Do you see how there's you can work your way through this list while doing your other activities? You don't have to teach them separately. Something else that I prioritize in my first week of school is a classroom scavenger hunt. And I create this classroom scavenger hunt based on routines and procedures I have around my classroom. So my scavenger hunt is going to have something like, how many steps is it from your seat to the trash can? After the students have completed their scavenger hunt, we're going to go over it and I'm going to explain my expectations for using the trash can. I might have something like, what's the hidden meme underneath the pencil sharpener? And I've cut out some stupid little meme and taped it underneath the pencil sharpener. And that'll be their answer for the scavenger hunt. And then whenever we're going over it, I'll explain my expectations for using the pencil sharpener. A question might be, list some areas in the classroom that are off limits to students. And then while we're going over it, I'm giving some expectations for, we don't go behind the bookcase. Miss Phillips' desk area is off limits. We don't go behind the door whenever we're working in partners or in groups on the floor. So that means that before I sat down and created this scavenger hunt, I used that checklist of routines and procedures and typed out or wrote out or had an idea of how I want them to go in my classroom. And then I used those things. I picked out some of them to put into my scavenger hunt. And again, if you're a new teacher or you're I need some help with my routines and procedures, the No Details Left Behind document has questions to guide you, to help you think of how you want these routines to look in your classroom. Things like voice levels, things like anchor charts, things like movement expectations, when do students use these routines? It has all types of questions to ask you for every single one of these routines and procedures for you to create your own. Or if you need somewhere to like a baseline to get started, I have my example breakdown where it says exactly how I do all of these things in my personal classroom, which obviously isn't going to fit for you, but it helps you kind of think of how specific you need to be, get some good ideas, some tips from someone who's been there, done that. If you're departmentalized and you have multiple class blocks or multiple class sections, some major routines that you're going to want to hit are coming into your classroom, transitioning to switch, those same instructional routines, like how do they come to the floor? How do they get your attention? How do you get their attention? Where do they store their materials? You're going to need to hit those routines as well with that class. We always do get to know you activities in the first 2 days of us switching. And then I also do that same classroom scavenger hunt with all of my classes, not just my homeroom. And then another activity I do in the first week of school is my classroom rules, which if you haven't noticed already, I'm not big on classroom rules because my classroom is so structured. We don't need to bust out classroom rules to correct a student or redirect a student because there's a procedure for every little thing in my classroom. However, I do have classroom rules and they look like this. I let my students come up with the rules. I use this to teach my group work expectations so I can cross that off on my checklist. I put a bunch of sticky notes at each table group and I tell my students, obviously they're not touching sticky notes, they're not touching anything right now. Their hands are off, they're looking at me. They're silent. I tell my students that they're going to work in their table groups to brainstorm rules. They're going to write one rule per sticky note, and they're going to use what we should do language. So I tell my students, I don't want to see things like no running. I want to see things like, what should we do? We should walk safely around the classroom. I let my students get to work. I'm walking around monitoring. Once we start kind of like squeezing out any last ideas, I have them take their hands off. I have them gather up all their sticky notes and call out ideas to share. This is another time that I'm reinforcing those expectations around raising their hands, how we answer my questions, how we share out ideas. And then, surprise, surprise, I recognize that these rules are actually broken up into 3 different categories: safety, learning, and well-being. Oh my gosh, can you believe it? And so then I make an anchor chart where I have like 3 columns: safety, learning, and well-being. And I have students come up and we sort the rules that they came up with based on, do they protect and respect our learning, our safety, or our well-being? Any duplicates, I just stack them up because of course we're gonna have lots of duplicate rules that different table groups came up with. But then I have like a nice anchor chart of like all the rules the students came up with. And it always just comes down to, in our classroom, we respect each other's learning, safety, and well-being. And then pro tip, those of you who are departmentalized, you can use a different color sticky note for each of your classes. So like my homeroom, everyone has green sticky notes. My second class all has pink, you get it. And then we just use that same chart for all the classes. And then we can hang it up all year. Another thing I focus on in the first week of school is setting up like our content area notebooks and folders. This is a great way to teach like some of those instructional expectations, like how you come to the floor for a lesson, what you do during independent work time, how we keep our notebooks and folders organized, where we store our notebooks and folders. So like in previous years, no matter what content I've taught, I always come up with kind of like a decoy lesson to set up our notebooks. So like for science, you can find like a YouTube read aloud of the book Notable Notebooks, and you can use that to like teach a lesson on setting up your notebook and then let your students go off to set up their notebooks how you've taught them. For math, you could have your students come do like a fact fluency lesson, whether it's like adding doubles or multiplication and division, but you could do like a refresh lesson on the floor with your students or during like your direct instruction piece, and then have your students go complete partner work or independent work and complete like a fact fluency page, and then have them like cut and glue it into their notebooks. So that's some notebook setup, that's some lesson expectations, there's some cutting and gluing expectations. Unfortunately, whenever I taught language arts, we used Lucy Calkins, and she always had a lesson on like readers notebooks. So we would come to the floor for like our Lucy Calkins mini lesson, and then I would send them off to go like set up their readers notebooks. And then also, pro tip, don't forget in the first week of school, with all of your classes, whether you're departmentalized or self-contained, you need to teach your students like all of your drills, your fire drills, your safety drills, all those things. Okay, and then continuing on our plan, now we're looking at like the first 2 weeks, our goals for the first 2 weeks. Remember we said that we wanted to try to have an idea of like how our instruction, how our content is going to look, how our classroom is going to flow as far as like your lessons and your student work goes. Basically your first 2 weeks is operation, like find your teacher flow. So that means I'm about to hit things like learning targets, success criteria, independent work time, small groups, differentiation. I can't get into all of that in this video. I saved all those things for another video. We're going to do a deep dive on all those instructional pieces later in the series. But what I want you to take away right now is that instruction and your classroom management are like married. You cannot teach really good instruction unless you have great classroom management. You're going to manage your classroom by doing really great instruction. They are hand in hand. So I'm going to use like annoying principal talk, and I'm going to say that I'm going to front load some of these instructional things right now, and then we're going to deep dive later on it in the summer, okay? Okay, so like I said, I use like really simple, basic like decoy lessons in the first like 2 weeks of school, setting up our notebooks, hitting our fact fluency, finding just right books, how scientists use their notebooks, putting maps in our social studies notebooks, things like that, like really basic, like how to do school lessons basically. And all of those things like circulate around my learning targets and my success criteria, which if you don't know about success criteria, let me put you on. Success criteria is basically a list of how to do things perfectly, which if you are type A, like me, you're a perfectionist, you want to know how to do things perfectly. Here's a list on how to do things perfectly. So I love giving success criteria to my students in lessons because I'm telling them basically exactly what I want their work to look like, how to have great model student work. Like when I learned how to do success criteria in my lessons, my teaching was life before success criteria and then life after success criteria. Gray and gloomy before, beautiful, colorful, vibrant after. It's basically like taking the abstract lessons and making it super, super concrete, which our students need. So the way that I teach success criteria, I do this in like the first few days of school. My campus used the depth and complexity icons. And so we would use a details flower to make like a representation of ourselves. So in the details flower, you put the main idea in the middle, and then each petal is a detail about yourself. You could do this with any get to know you activity, but what you're going to want to do is make your own model or like student example. You can use this to teach your students about yourself and use it as model work. And you're going to create a list of exactly what this needs to look like to be great work. Here's my list right here of my success criteria for my details flower. And look, I even put it in a must do can do format with that timer up on the board. So my must do was that list of success criteria, those things that I wanted my details flower to have. And then the can do was what they could, activities they could do when they were done. Notice I keep it nice and simple. If you also do success criteria, you could teach like how you want your math homework to look all year by giving them success criteria for it and then like practicing it in class. Like I said, Lucy Calkins has that lesson on finding just right books. That's a great lesson. I hate to say it. It is a great lesson for teaching success criteria for finding just right books. But my main thing is that you're also teaching the students what success criteria is, because I use success criteria all year with all of my lessons. So my students need to know what it is and how to use it. So I use these decoy lessons, the details flower, the Lucy Calkins, the math homework. I teach them like, this is success criteria. This is how we're going to use it. Let's practice using it. Show me you can make a great details flower. Show me you know your fact fluency. Show me you can make great math homework. Show me you can pick a just right book. And again, I'm like front loading all of this like pretty intense like content knowledge, because my main takeaway here is that great instruction, my students have a crystal clear image of what to do, goes hand in hand with classroom management. If my students are kind of foggy on what they're supposed to be doing, my classroom management is not going to be that great. Another thing that I teach my students in the first 2 weeks of school is my method of questioning. Great classroom managers are not asking whole group questions and then taking random hands. That is like the 1800s, that's tiny one-room schoolhouse days. Like, we're not doing that. What we're going to do is task our students, or I call it active answering, which means that 100% of our students are going to be working and thinking of an answer to the question that you just asked. And what it needs is some accountability piece. So you have to have a way, if you ask a question like, what is 3 times 7? You have to have a way, we're not taking random hands, we need a way to make sure that 100% of our students have an answer. So some ways that I might do that is I might say, I want you to think of what the answer to 3 times 7 is. I want you to think, don't say anything. I want to see them thinking. And then I want to see a thumb right here on your chest when you have an answer for what 3 times 7 is. That's a great accountability piece. I can now look around my classroom for 100% of thumbs, and I'm waiting. I might be scaffolding, giving a question. Okay, what's 2 times 7? Counter groups of 7. I might be scaffolding if I'm waiting on some thumbs, but this is a great way for me to make sure that everybody's got an answer. And then I'm going to cold call, which means that I'm drawing a popsicle stick with one of my students' names on it. That's another accountability piece. All of my students need to be prepared and know that Miss Phillips might call on me. I'm just as much of a risk as anybody else to answer this question, so I need to make sure that I have an answer. But you know what? No one is stressing out because I've asked other questions. I've helped them get there. If my students need the support of looking at their multiplication chart, I went over there and helped them get there if they still didn't have that thumb up. If you have your thumb up, that means that you are ready to answer the question, and they'll learn over time that when Miss Phillips says, put your thumb here, and my thumb is there, I need to make sure that I have an answer because I could get called on. Another example of this active answering, or like giving our students a task to do instead of just like raising their hands, is that you can give them like a sentence stem and then let them turn and talk. But what this might look like is something like this. Okay, I want you guys to think of what the answer to 3 times 7 might look like. And I want you to finish the sentence. The product of 3 times 7 is blank. And I'll write that sentence stem on the board. The product of 3 times 7 is blank. Okay, when I say the magic word of cheese, you're going to talk to your shoulder partner at your table using this sentence. And then I'm going to draw a random person to answer a question for us. So everyone needs to have an answer. Cheese, my magic word. Students are talking, they're using that sentence stem. I'm circulating around the room to make sure that they're actually using that sentence stem and they have an answer. When it starts to quiet down, I get them silent with my attention getter. I go get my popsicle sticks and boom, I get an answer. 100% of my students have participated in this. And I'm not just taking 1 or 2 random kids out of the great wide abyss when everyone else is just like sitting back chilling, knowing that this kid's going to answer the question every single time. So they don't have to do the work. Another strategy is called everybody writes. So that means that I might say, okay, I'm going to give you guys a multiplication problem and I want you to write the product on your board. 3 times 7, everybody writes. We don't hold up our boards until I give the magic word. That way no one's looking at anybody else's board. They're writing they're writing their own answer. And then show me your boards. And I can see with my eyes 100% like which students got the question right and which students did it. And if this is overwhelming or you're like really into this, I'm going to get more into like these questioning strategies later on in the series, okay? Because remember, my main takeaway, like why I'm saying this right now, is that these are the types of things that I want to be practicing in the first 2 weeks of school, because these are things that I know I use in my classroom all year long. Another instructional strategy that I want to be practicing in those first 2 weeks is like that gradual release model. So like I do it, we do it, you do it. or like chunking instructions. I feel like this is not something that they taught us in college or taught us in like our teacher prep programs. I remember when I was a new teacher, I like gave my students their work and I was like, okay, go work, like do your work. And of course, none of them knew what to do and they were all raising their hands and I was overwhelmed. I learned very quickly that you need to start a task together, like give students directions, start the task together, give them time to work. Let them work, get their attention, come back together, check in, do the next steps, send them off to work. Let them work, you're circulating around, get their attention, come back together, check in. Like I have to follow that format with my students. It's like a scaffolding strategy that I have to follow with my students. So that's something I teach. That's something that we practice in those first 2 weeks of school because I know I'm going to need it for the rest of the year. I'm also going to nail down my expectations for like what I want my students to be doing, how I want my students to work when it's independent or group or partner work. When they're working at their seats, I'm going to nail down my expectations for that time. I'm going to nail down how to use that must-do, can-do format. Some tips to make sure that you can pull off the must-do, can-do format effectively is to make sure that your can-do options are like no prep. It's stuff that like they already have access to. Your students don't have to like get up and walk around. Like they have everything they need right there. That's going to minimize out of our seats off-task behaviors. And then your can-do options also need to have like no intervention or support from you. It should be work that students can do independently. Another routine that I'm able to teach at the beginning of the year is actually my small groups and what the rest of my class is doing while I'm with a small group. And usually I'm able to do that during my reading testing. Like we have to start our reading testing at the beginning of the year. So I'm pulling students while my whole group is working. But some ways that I'm able to pull that off is by doing that must-do, can-do format. Everyone has what they need. No one is out of their seats. This is independent work. Or if they are working in groups or table groups or partners or whatever, I'm doing frequent check-ins. So that means that while I'm working with my small groups, every time I have a break, I'm checking in. Okay, we're at the 5-minute mark. Everyone should be on page 2 of whatever. Or I'm going through my roster. So-and-so, what are you on? Great. So-and-so, what are you on? Great. So-and-so, what are you on? Great. So students are seeing that I am following through on where they need to be and they can hear where everybody else is. So if they've been jacking around and they're behind, they know like, oh, I'm gonna have to turn this in and I'm not done yet. I'm not moving along like everybody else is. I have a timer up on the screen so students know this needs to be done. This needs to be turned in. There's some accountability piece when this timer goes off. And then also just know that differentiation, like giving those students what they need while they're out there in the whole group and you're working with a small group, a lot of times behaviors are going to be unmet academic needs. So if you have students that are off task, it's because they're not able to complete the work or the work is too hard or there's barriers for them or maybe it's too easy. There's some academic need that's not being met. So like I said, we're going to talk about that later in the series on like an instructional practices video. Okay, so at the end of the 2 weeks, some main takeaways here are that your students have received some type of direct instruction from you and they know the expectations around that. Your students have had multiple opportunities to work either independently, in partners, in groups, hopefully all of those things, and they know what the expectations for those things are. Your students should know like some major routines and procedures around your classroom, supplies, moving around the classroom, expectations for talking, how to get your attention. And your students should be able to like reliably know your expectations and what you expect of them. So this is a very like zoomed out perspective on what you want those first 2 weeks, week, and first day to look like. So with all those things like floating around, I want you to like anchor yourself in. You want your classroom to feel safe. You want to establish some predictability and you want to build community in that classroom. And the ways that you're going to do that is by solid routines and procedures for how your classroom runs. You have solid expectations and you know how to get your students to meet those expectations. You've built some community either like intentionally with like morning meeting, different activities, or your students have worked together so much in different capacities that they have a decent idea of who their classmates are. And you and your students have an idea of how your classroom kind of runs and operates and flows on a day-to-day basis. Those are your goals for the first 2 weeks. Okay, this is the point in the video where I usually tell you guys like what our next video is going to be and to stay tuned, but I'm gonna let you guys tell me what is the next video that you guys wanna see. I have some options for y'all, okay? So you guys can tell me in the comments. Do you want the next video to be like an actual list of activities and lessons that I teach or that you can teach in the first few days of school with like how I do it, what my expectations are, very like tangible examples of things to do in your classroom on the first few days of school? Do you want that deep dive on instruction, learning targets, success criteria, small groups and whole groups, active answering? Is that where we want to go next? Do you want the next video to be over like community building and morning meeting? Or do you want the next video to be over, we haven't talked about this hardly at all, consequences, behaviors, strategies surrounding stuff like that? Let me know in the comments. I have not planned out my next video, so it is totally up to you guys, and whatever comments I get, that's what it's going to be. So speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, I'm going over to the post-dismissal debrief. Over there, we're going to continue talking about success criteria. It is like the secret sauce to being a great teacher, in my opinion. I'm going to give like some examples of lessons that you can do with like do's and don'ts. We're also going to have some fun with like some social media trends I see going on, like who's going to war from our schools, who I will be sending to the front lines, as well as reading comments from unhinged classroom jobs. So I hope to see you guys over there, and let me know in the comments what you guys want to see next.